Well, it began in November 2017. I was contacted by a charity who were very concerned about one of their clients, a woman called Paulette Wilson, who'd been taken into detention, was being threatened with deportation back to Jamaica, a country that she hadn't been in for 50 years. So Paulette is 61, arrived in Britain from Jamaica at the age of 10, and had lived all her life here, had worked in the House of Commons as a chef, and there was absolutely no reason either to detain her or to deport her because she was living here entirely legally. We published that article in The Guardian, and in the weeks that followed, I was gradually contacted by more and more people who were experiencing peculiar, very harsh decisions at the hands of the Home Office.
Did you think Paulette was a one-off for a while?
Yes.
It was almost anomalous.
I
It was
just thought
some
it
sort
was
of weird...
a kind of inexplicable, very cruel decision by the Home Office that was a mistake.
Right.
But in the weeks that followed, it became obvious that there was something much more systemic going on, and eventually clear that this was something affecting thousands of people.
Thousands of people. And if you had to describe what was going on in systemic terms, what would you say? How would you put it now?
Well, two things had happened. The coalition government had made this commitment to getting net migration down to the tens of thousands. They weren't able to get it down. Quarter after quarter, these migration figures will come out showing that they were getting nowhere near their target. So in about 2012, there was a concerted effort through the cabinet to introduce a whole spectrum of policies that would make Britain a very hostile environment, in Theresa May's words, for anybody who was here illegally. And that required people to show their passports on many more occasions, not just at the border, but when they were trying to get housing, when they were trying to get jobs, healthcare. It's
a hostile environment for people who are here legally as well. That's a point that was often missed, isn't it? Albeit that you will be allowed to go about your business after you've shown your papers.
Yeah.
The idea of having to prove your papers...
well, that's absolutely right. I mean, part of the problem was it turned out that the Home Office wasn't very good at determining who was here legally and who was here illegally, which is kind of the one thing that you would expect the Home Office to be good at. They just couldn't do it. And so all of the people who were affected by this scandal were here entirely legally. They'd arrived here legally in the 60s and 70s, just didn't have paperwork showing that they were here.
And who would? I mean, that's the other point, isn't it? We're seeing this now with many EU citizens worried about their future here. The idea that we've all got a trunk in our attic that details what we did every year going back to 1960 or 1950 in some cases, 48 for Windrush itself,
I mean, I think the thing that has made quite a lot of people affected by the Windrush scandal rather sad is that for EU nationals, the bar has been significantly lowered.
Yes.
So actually, relatively, it's a much easier process. But people who were affected by this were being asked to go back and provide documentary evidence, placing them in the UK for every year that they'd been here right back to 1973. And people just couldn't do it. I mean, I couldn't do that.
And that is why you told us last time we met, and it's detailed in the book, stories of people who've ended up being persecuted because they went home to care for a relative or I mean, similar family situations.
I mean, one of the most upsetting cases was that of a man who was taken to Jamaica for a 50th birthday party by a number of his children. They took him, they had a great time. It was the first time he'd been back to Jamaica since he was a child. After a week, they went back to the airport to come home, and his children were allowed home, but he wasn't because the airport officials said that he didn't have the right passport, and he was stuck there for 18 months. It's a most extraordinary story.
It's a most extraordinary book as well. It's quite brilliant, and this isn't a criticism, it's an observation. There's not a lot of you in it. And quite rightly, because it's the case studies, it's the stories, it's the unfolding tragedies that concern us. But I'm quite interested in you, and when you concluded without doubt that this wasn't happening by accident. Even if it was happening to thousands of people, it could have been a computer says no type scenario. You're married to a government minister, of which a little more later, and the conclusion I'm led to by the book and by your journalism was that the government knowingly ruined these people's lives.
The government certainly had very clear warnings 4 or 5 years before the problem emerged that exactly this group of people would be affected. And somehow or other, these warnings were discarded. And it really raises really difficult questions about, what kind of person the government is concerned about and what kind of person it's prepared to accept may become collateral damage of new policies introduced. So, they absolutely knew that this
You're
was a
dancing
prospect.
around the possibility, well, you're not dancing around it. I'm hearing you say essentially that if these people hadn't come from the Caribbean, they could have expected a higher duty of care.
Well, certainly a lot of those affected are very clear in attributing this to racism. We're still waiting for an independent government inquiry into this, the lessons learned review that has in fact been written and has been leaked, and that we know will say that there is institutionalised racism somewhere within this.